Now this is an English event, and the party has strived to provide educated, lucid and civilised speakers, and up to this moment they've been extremely successful. David organises a list of speakers and insists on contrast and variety. Black country sophistication seemed to him to be the perfect antidote to eloquence overload. I am no longer a member of the National Council, so I'm taking the opportunity and liberty to present a purely personal opinion, and I should like to take the opportunity to thank our leadership for giving me this chance, and in doing so displaying their true English grit and courage. I do this and hope that our leader will allow me to remain a party member. Now the Interpretation Act is an umbrella piece of legislation. It explains that in legislation man includes woman and vice versa. So when I use the familiar Englishman or he, it also includes our ladies. In fact, it includes anybody wearing a skirt, unless of course yet another Scotsman has infiltrated yet another English institution. I have put a presentation on YouTube that is designed to help set the scene and understanding for what I am about to say. Here's the link. The idea of a United Kingdom was good, but it required the goodwill and commitment of all involved. That was never forthcoming, and will certainly not pop out of the fairy godmother's wand at this late stage. Flag-waving patriotism is fantastic. The stirring sight of masses of our flags is truly inspiring. St George's Day, magnificent. Jerusalem, red and white shirts and an English bull terrier, great. But these are just symbols. Important symbols, but people have to identify with them before they become meaningful. I think that it is now obvious that we're not going to get English self-determination and a return of our nationhood by appealing to English pride and patriotism. For too long our people have been conditioned to recoil at the sight of anything English. They've been denigrated, denied an identity and ethnically washed away in a tide of artificially generated guilt and denial. It is a fact that sophisticated people in Middle England gave twice the number of votes to the monster raving loonies than to a party with English in its title. That is justification enough to say that appealing to the patriotism of people that are either ashamed of their nationality or not aware of it is not going to be very productive. I say that with due recognition of the great injustice that has been thrust on the English people. I say English people deliberately. I do not say the people of England. That is because it is us ethnic English that are in process of being marginalised in our own country. There is an attempt to rewrite history, and claims are made that there are no such people as the ethnic English. The anti-English British government trip over their two left feet to recognise the ethnicity of Scots, Welsh, Irish, the Australian Aborigine, the New Zealand Maori, the American Indian, Gypsies and every recently constructed state of the Balkans, but not yours. You, like the Yeti, are a myth. But in their desperation to deny English ethnicity, the British government have to recognise it. They cannot obliterate or discriminate against that does not exist. They have to see the target in order to direct their discrimination against it. They have to admit the existence of the English in order to be able to direct their attacks against us. In order to be excluded, you have to be identified. And it most certainly is not all the people of England that are being racially discriminated against. It is the ethnic English that are the target. The way that we're identified is not by naming us, but by naming every other group and designating them an ethnic minority. It is identification by exclusion. What is now required is that the English themselves recognise their own ethnicity. Our party needs to recognise that as well. I think that I have always loved England. I say think because until the last decade I never had to think about it. I, like most English people, was not into overt flag waving. So why the change from benign patriotism to political activism? It wasn't because I suddenly fell in love with the English ideal. It wasn't because I smelt the first dews of an English spring, a cuckoo, or the rolling hills of our lovely counties. It was not the sight of the English flag or a picture of St. George. It wasn't a proud patriotic awakening or voices rendered hoarse by the strains of Jerusalem. It was the realisation that the voice of authority and representation in England was turning into a clipped Scottish brogue of relentless demand. My television spoke to me in short barks of northern authority. My telephone seemed to connect me north of Hadrian's Wall every time I sought advice or needed to make inquiry. The voice of advertising and public opinion took on a song that became to me a grating, relentless whine that made me dive for the TV remote. It was also the realisation that the streets of our cities and towns were becoming enclaves of conversations in languages that I could not understand. What turned me was rage, was anger, outrage at what was being done to me personally, the lowering of my living standards, the attack on the very roots and fabric of my identity, the imposition of second-class status on me as an Englishman. The denial of choice in the matter of immigration, the lack of choice as to who I want as my neighbour, the use of my hard-earned money to support Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, Europe, an American war, African dictatorships and friends of politicians without consultation or even a modicum of consideration. The deliberate and cynical destruction of the counties of my childhood and the wanton dilution of our traditional neighbourhoods, the betrayal of my father who lies buried in a war cemetery in France. It is a personal insult from creatures that are not even of the same genetic species as the people that built the nation that they are currently trying to obliterate. The utter contempt that these people have for me as an Englishman and the casual dismissal of my existence makes me feel murderous. The contempt is well illustrated in the YouTube presentation that I mentioned earlier. It is a contempt that the cowards dare not show to even a convicted foreign terrorists. Yet they are comfortable and confident to ceaselessly throw the insults contained in that film at us, because in their eyes we are of no consequence, because we are without voice. That is what changed me from a passive British man to a fighting Englishman. It is personal, very personal. I care for Britain as Britain cares for me. I care for Britain as the other constituent nations of the UK do. Except for me, Britain is not a platinum credit card giving access to an ATM machine connected to someone else's bottomless bank account. It is a voracious bloodsucker that is hell-bent on destroying my very being, my memory and a future for my descendants. Britain is the machinery that enabled bitter enemies to deprive, rob, abuse, deny my very existence and my worth. It is the vehicle of annihilation being used to wipe out my past, present and my future. Its primary use is to serve the interests of the minor countries of the UK and provide status for the midgets that inhabit Westminster. Some 15 years ago I became aware of what was happening. I perceived an anti-English creeping aggression that became more obvious by the day. It was war by increments waged by slowly advancing enemies wearing the mantle of friendship. Clandestine enemies are always dangerous enemies, and it was not until we became aware of their efforts that we began to see the truth of what they were up to. Now they have been so emboldened by the complacency and tolerance of the English that they don't even try to hide it. Despite us being the oldest settled people of Europe, with a rich history of achievement, these political maggots have wriggled their way into the carcass of Britain to deny us voice, choice or a national existence. The political establishment have used Britain to render us voiceless and virtually powerless. They have used it to secure the nationalist aspiration of their own people. They no longer even bother to hide their obvious contempt for the English people. In 1997, Labour gratefully took the reins of power from the brotherhood of the British political establishment, and the first thing they did was to isolate England to protect the remaining countries of the UK from the collateral damage that would inevitably occur as a result of the planned destruction of England. They did it by granting virtual independence and distancing Westminster from any decision making in Scotland, and giving sufficient status to Wales and Northern Ireland to ensure protection from long-term damage. In effect, they took them out of Britain, leaving us English to wave the Union flag alone. Then as soon as Blair conspired his way into number 10, he scrapped the party rules requiring renomination of leader, thus ensuring his tenure for the duration of the plunder years. They also scrapped the laws relating to treason. Now if that was not self-interest, I do not know what is. These people explained the benefits of Britain to their own countrymen as the British dividend. Well, for the Scots, the British dividend has been 11 fat years of plenty. Hundreds of billions of pounds in direct grants, over 200,000 jobs created in Scotland. Nepotism by those ensconced in England has ensured lucrative jobs in the public service, media and institutions for their own like-minded compatriots. Massive capital projects have been carried out in Scotland. A vast amount of money has been spent on tourism improvement to ensure wealth creation. Huge research grants and investment into the education system to secure their future good fortunes. A national parliament combined with a very generous British government under the control of confirmed Scottish patriots. Shelter from the destructive policies imposed on England. The gift of 30% of English territorial fisheries, oil and gas reserves. Recognition as a nation and the opportunities for referenda on a future for self-determination. A voice in Europe. Choice. For the Irish, hundreds of billions of pounds in reparations for their own terrorist activity. Direct grants under Barnett and £50 billion to form a government. The biggest per capita gain from the Barnett fiddle. £1.2 billion bribe to save Brown's neck on the 42-day detention vote. Shielding from destructive policies imposed on England. An Irish Assembly to give voice to Irish interests. A voice in Europe. A promise of a future as a nation. Opportunities for referenda on self-determination. Membership of the Celtic Club with access to the British dividend. And again, choice. And for the Welsh, the gift of the English county of Monmouthshire. An assembly with increasing powers to ensure that the people of Wales are heard. Billions of pounds in direct grants, jobs, inward investment, capital projects. Membership of the Celtic Club with all its benefits. Recognition as a nation, a voice in Europe, the opportunities for referenda on future self-determination, and again, choice. And Britain's gift to the English. Well, first of all, the distinct honour of financing the Celtic Club. Near bankruptcy at the hands of the member for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath. Denial of self-determination. Massive targeted inward immigration. Geographical fragmentation into regions ruled by unelected quangos. Racial discrimination on a scale that dwarfs that supposedly directed at any other group. Minimal social and health care. Exportation of jobs. Crime rates of epidemic proportions. Rule and representation by leaders who have signed public oaths to use England for the benefit of their own country. A Prime Minister elected in another country and not accountable to even one English voter. Loss of the English county of Monmouthshire along with 400,000 English nationals and 500 square miles of English sovereign territory. Loss of our farming, loss of our industry, loss of 30% of our sea resources, loss of national identity, the worst educational system in the developed world, loss of our borders and the right to control inward immigration. An electoral system that judges have declared to be so corrupt as to equate to third world banana republics. The inability to oppose the dictatorial European Union. Over 500 traitors ensconced as our representatives at Westminster, and no say in our own future, dependent on the will of foreigners both here and in Europe. These are the predations that historically can only be achieved by war and conquest by invading armies. It matters not that we have generously supported them to a better standard of living than we enjoy for ourselves. It matters not that generations of Englishmen have accepted, nurtured and welcomed them to share our prosperity and brotherhood. All that is history. The only morals are exploitation and greed. You do not hear our fellow Scottish, Welsh and Irish Britons protesting at the way their English British brethren are being treated. Instead, they are demanding more cash and greater freedom to decide how to spend it. They stand in satisfaction watching the discomfort of a nation. They watch with a glee that matured in their mother's milk and their own institutions. These people were never friends, and we have to recognise that in the modern Britain, constructed by the Westminster, and you do not give your rivals the key to the storeroom. The infiltrators, our neighbours here and on the continent, are rivals. Now, I quite glibly allowed the word billion to slip off my tongue. Just a few £100 billion to Scotland, a few billion more to Wales, a few £100 billion to Northern Ireland, and a few to our friends on the continent. Does anyone know what £1 billion looks like? I don't mean how many notes. What's the feel of £1 billion? Well, if you wanted to save £1 billion and you put £1 in your piggy bank every second of every 24 hours of every day, you would have had to start saving a few years before the Suez crisis. And if you're not so well off and could only afford £1 a minute, you would have had to have started saving before Jesus Christ was born. Now, if you could only afford £1 an hour, you would have been standing in line with the dinosaurs and very lonely, because mankind had not yet arrived. Now that is 1 billion. We're talking about countless hundreds of billions. That explains why you have to sell your kids' inheritance to get aged care, for which you have already paid many times over. And it explains why your standard of living is nowhere near that which you would expect from one of the world's leading economies. Mismanagement and theft on a cosmic scale, and our friend Gordon was conducting the symphony at the time. The tune he played was the British national anthem. He called the tune, and we should ensure that he and his fellow instrumentalists pay the piper at some future time. We're the English. We're nice people. We do not like to offend anyone, so we take pride in defeat and play the game so that the opposition can enjoy it. We keep a stiff upper lip, turn the other cheek and have great humility. We would rather make fun of ourselves than denigrate others. Now that is a lovely quaint image that paints a lovely national image of those people who used to be called the English. For too long we have played the role of the English gentleman. I've had enough of standing back whilst others trample me down and empty my pockets. I do not want these foreign burglars in my house, handing my life's work, my precious memorabilia and my family heirlooms out of the window to their friends and accomplices outside. For me, the time has come to change. I am no longer prepared to have a nasty little nationalist like Gordon Brown tell me that I can't have a nationality, that I am a nobody. I am not having him tell me that I can't be represented by a parliament of my own people, whilst he and his fellow infiltrators climb on my back in order that they can set up an infrastructure in their own country to secure a firm base for their inevitable independence and future well-being. He's not doing that to me. By accepting and promoting a British identity, we have connived in a plot to destroy ourselves. Whilst we've been waving the flag and singing God Save the Queen, they've been busy doing exactly the opposite. We sang God Save the Queen while Scotland the Brave's fifth columnist stole our pension, our future, our education, our resources, our health service, our wealth, our national identity and our streets. They have destroyed our ability to grow our own food, to manufacture our own goods. As part of a well-orchestrated plan, they are busy selling us so hard into Europe that we are now almost impotent, unable to resurrect our own nation or national fortunes. We're expected to keep a stiff upper lip. We're expected to turn the other cheek. We're expected to thank the tartan mafia at Westminster for our unelected regional government, for our ministers of the regions. We're to be grateful for the opportunity to finance the peripheral countries and endure the daily sight of our people dying through lack of drugs and aged care, whilst reading of the wonderful lifestyle that we're financing for our fellow pseudo-Britons. We're powerless to stop them concreting over our countryside to build millions of houses in a country with a declining native population. These are immigrant towns that are designed to ensure that inward migration stays south of the border. I've had enough. We should all be shouting we've had enough. My anger is not confined to these creatures and their supporters that have such a grip on our country. It is a sobering thought that from the whole of England we struggle to get meaningful attendances for the only forum for English political voice. I am angry at the complacency, ignorance and inconsequentiality of our people. 50 million people who could only muster 200 to stride through the streets of our capital city demanding justice for their own country. I am angry that an English nationalist party cannot get sufficient funding or activists to construct a sustained and converted effort to remove the parasites from our political system. I am angry that every year 400,000 people who care about their quality of life and future try to secure it by running abroad for sanctuary, leaving their country ripe for colonisation. I am angry that they can live in the shadows of their warrior forefathers and wilt in front of a few northern invaders, a small group of hate-filled predators that are absolutely astounded at their own success and unexpected good fortune against the old enemy that used to be worthy of at least respect. I am angry at our failure to mobilise our people. If we had the English people behind us, as the Scots, Welsh and Irish have theirs, the destructive malignancies that inhabit Westminster would not last a week. It is time for the people of England to take our country back and make our politicians do what the people demand of them, not the other way round. And if they don't, they should be made terrified to leave the relative safety of their own homes. Consider if the roles were reversed and the English tried to do this on the Scots. There would be a tartan Republican army ferrying truckloads of agrochemicals down the M6 to the tune of the bagpipes before we could even say, "What's that whining sound?" If anyone tried to pull the same stunt on the French, every lamppost down the Champs-Élysées would be decorated with a politician. Maybe it's time that we English change from full English to porridge oats for breakfast, or perhaps a baguette and cheese. The English nationalist community, including our own party, now need to take the gloves off. Abandon politically correct claptrap, say it as it is, and start speaking the language of nationalists intent on freeing our country from foreign domination. Thank you.